What makes a good composition? Good to see you. Last week I made 5 artworks in 5 days, even if the artworks in question are small collage pieces. But in this video I'll show you how each of them came together, and I'll talk about the composition of them in some detail, with the hope that maybe you'll feel inspired to think about your own compositions in a new way, and maybe you'll have some fuel for creative explorations of your own, regardless of your medium. This composition started with this arresting photo of the infamous border wall, which of course is not a wall at all, but an oppressive-looking fence. This was shot for the New York Times a long while ago by Veronica Cardenas. This is an old paper I've had lying around. It was interesting to me that such a geometric, essentially abstract composition can read as so political and feel so heavy with meaning. But I wanted to use it as pure geometric building blocks, and because I'm composing a series of dark newsprint collages, what ends up having impact here is actually the air in between the fence posts. These white stripes are technically the absence of material. They're made of air. And then these gray stripes up top are made of sunlight shining through the fence. Beyond the festival of stripes, I'm employing some leather distributed around the image, which is reflecting light in a similar way to the dress on the woman in the center, whose hands I quite liked. Feels almost religious. I let that dark shape on the right cut into them a bit, perhaps pointing to them. And then that diagonal set of stripes felt like a bold move that I added at the end of the session. You'll notice that everything else largely adheres to 90-degree angles. Everything is rather grid-like, and then this comes in at an angle to disrupt that order a bit. But it's not completely unaware of its surroundings. While it is less obvious, we do have a countering diagonal up here on the right, and so this is responding to that. And it's also responding to this female figure. So it's disruption, but carefully considered disruption. The final thing I'll mention about this piece is that these small pink moments are helping to move the eye around the composition. Let's have a look at another collage. I'm using a similar disruptive trick here with that bold diagonal set of stripes from the fence photo, and in this case it's really interacting with a female figure in a way that is quite focused on a sensitive area, let's say. So I think that's formally interesting, but it's also easy to start constructing some meaning out of that interaction. I think that those black lines can resemble redacted text, so they're maybe like censorship bars. That could invoke a sexual prudishness or suppression, or else it could easily be seen as having something to do with reproductive rights and government control over the female body. But beyond those kinds of interpretations, I like that there's again some play with different materials here in the background, and in this composition I allowed more angles to be present, like this little triangle highlighting her foot, or this zipper up on the right, or this area of light on the left that comes to meet the fence bars. These things really focus attention inward towards the subject in the center. But then, as in the last image, I'm using little pops of red to move you around the image. I think this one's pretty successful. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so the idea here was to, rather than weaving together a dark background and placing a female figure in the center, I thought I would try to take a larger image of a figure and use her as the background, essentially, and then maybe layer things on top. I thought I could get some mileage out of that crossed neckline. I like the geometry of that. And I think I'm echoing that with this checkered pattern in the top left, there's maybe something interesting happening there. But beyond that, I feel like this composition didn't quite come together. I planned to cover up the white dress more, like I did with the big black shape here, but that area just became a dead black void. I probably should have continued to layer more pieces in order to end up somewhere interesting, but I just kind of ran out of steam, as it felt like this composition wasn't quite fitting into my overall series. I tried to stretch what the parameters for the series are, but I don't think I really succeeded. But that's okay. You know, the fun thing about doing these small collages is that there's very little pressure here, and if I don't love something, I can just try another one. Here I got into these dark night skies with the distant car lights. It feels like a slick 80s or 90s movie, maybe something by Paul Verhoeven or something. The figure is from an advertisement, and it's interesting how that seems to have turned this entire composition into something that feels much more commercial. It's a little defanged, I think, as a work of art. I'm not sure I like that. But it's pleasant enough to look at, and there are some things that I think are working compositionally. I rather like how she's emerging from behind this vertical strip of city skyline. That has some of the compositional boldness I've highlighted in other pieces. It's almost pushing the edge of the work in, and it's unafraid to cover up the subject, which I think helps bring a little bit of mystique to an image that probably can use that help. And then the little hint of gold here leads into her thigh in a nice way. And the other bits of gold throughout, including her high heel, are kind of speaking together, even if they're speaking in a language of a certain kind of curated luxury for the masses. When you make collage work, I think one of the things to really consider is whether you're speaking someone else's language, or whether you've managed to kind of piece together a language of your own. It's like using samples in music. Do you end up with a song that's just repeating the musical ideas in your source material? Or are you able to create a whole new kind of music by recontextualizing or restructuring or remixing in a way that invents a new kind of grammar, you know? I think that this particular composition might be falling a bit short on that count. But these things are subjective. Let's look at one more. Yeah, so this composition interests me because I kind of like it, even though I can identify some things that I think are not advisable for what I'm trying to do. I always love it when something I make challenges the wisdom I think I've accrued about making art. When something ends up working for me a little bit despite itself. So I guess what I've done here is I've basically created these 4 vertical bands that split up the composition. So those are quite even and predictable and rigid. And the source material I'm using is kind of all over the place. It's a bit chaotic, this whole thing. To me, it almost looks like someone's amateur scrapbooking thing, you know? Like just a relentless and maybe thoughtless cavalcade of unrelated images. And then the figure in the middle is just too small to really feel like a main subject. It gets a little bit swallowed up by all the noise here. And yet, it kind of does pierce through. The dress connects to this diffuse, white, feathery shape in a surreal and interesting way, and that moment stands out by way of this vertical blue strip that feels like the only place to rest your eyes in this composition. There is a ceaseless verticality to this piece, only grounded by this horizontal stone foundation at the bottom, but that's much too faint to have any real impact. These little patterned fabric pieces connect with each other in a similar way to how I use little color pieces in some of the other collages. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot that connects all these elements together. Not a lot of order here. If I was trying to teach people about composition, I would never use this image as a teaching aid. It's entirely too confusing and slapdash, and it suffers from a lack of visual hierarchy. There's very little variety of scale, too. But I don't know, there's just something about it that transcends all of its problems for me. One of the joys of art is that, you can talk and analyze and rationalize all day long, but sometimes we just like what we like without being able to exactly pinpoint a reason. It's like love in that way. We need more love and we need more art, so thank you so much for being here. Please like this video so that maybe another 14 people will get to see it. And subscribe if you haven't already. I make videos about art and culture and other stuff that people like you and me find interesting. I'll see you in the next one.